Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching Capterra's videos. I am talking today to AJ Shankur. He is CEO of Everlaw, which is the eDiscovery platform. This year they were awarded a Communicator Award. They were the only legal technology recipient of the award. Everybody else is a law firm. They're working on making eDiscovery more effective and efficient. And so thank you so much for joining us today. So you all are cloud-based and installed, right?
We are exclusively cloud-based at this point.
Exclusively cloud-based, okay. Does your software host everything that might be relevant to potential litigation? Because that seems like a lot of data.
Yeah, it ends up being a lot of data. That's why software like ours exists. It ends up being, we have many, many cases that are in the hundreds of gigabytes, even in the terabytes of data. And that's the kind of volume we're seeing today. You know, if you think about in a big corporation, pretty much any email that you write is potentially discoverable. It might be relevant to a litigation, and you write, I write probably 100 emails a day. You might even write more, and every employee is generating this much data all the time. When a lawsuit happens, it turns out there's a whole lot that can be discovered.
Okay. So how do you know about what size of data that you're hosting for clients on average? And is that?
It's all over the map. We have some clients that use this just for, even for under a gigabyte for small matters. That's still a lot of data, it turns out. That's a lot of documents. But we have several that are well over a terabyte and several that are over 2 terabytes for single matters. So these are very, very large, complex cases involving lots of data.
And how are you able to host that data for people cost effectively?
I think that's where it's a combination of 2 things. One is the advent of the cloud. Cloud storage is built to be scalable and affordable. And the second, I'd say, is careful engineering on our part, right? We really try to make sure that we're doing things as efficiently as possible, because we know we want to be able to host data not just for today's needs, but in 2020 or 2025, when there's 10 or 100 times or more as much data as there is now, we want to make sure we can handle that. So by doing that efficiently, I think we're able to handle the amount of data we're even seeing now.
Okay, can you talk to me? So I'm looking for eDiscovery software, and some of the things that I want to be sure of is that as the size of my data grows, I'm not going to be that it can scale up as far as pricing goes. So let's say, something new happens and I suddenly have to host a lot more data, and I don't want the price that I'm paying to skyrocket as well. And then the other thing that I would probably be concerned about would be making sure that all this data that I'm hosting is stored redundantly so that it's not lost. So those 2 questions, and then a follow-up question would be, what other questions should I be asking when I'm looking for?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the first one, the industry standard generally is you pay for storage by the gigabyte. So the more data you store, the more you pay. But we, for instance, our pricing model is such that the actual cost of every additional gigabyte goes down. So the more data you store, the cheaper it gets. So if you have a case that goes from small to big, you won't be, if it's 10 times as large, you won't be paying 10 times as much. And so that's built in, and that's to take advantage of the fact that when you have data, that kind of economy of scale, we're able to do things more cheaply than we are, for the small data sets. The second question about redundancy, that's obviously very important. Now, throw in security there as well. They're very important. You don't want your data to get lost, and you don't want your data to get stolen. And I think those are 2 instances actually where the cloud actually does very well. As far as data getting lost, we store all our data in triplicate, so in 3 different locations. We back up our servers 6 times a day, and so it's very, very hard to actually lose data that way. And we're also very careful about security, and I think that's something that you're actually able to do. We encrypt everything, all your data at rest, that is while it's actually stored, and also in transit when it's being transmitted between our servers and to you. So there's never a moment where an unencrypted version of the data is sitting around. So even if someone got physical access to the computers that we use, they couldn't actually make sense of the data. I think it's a nice property of the model we've designed. As for other questions you should ask about discovery software, those are just kind of the base infrastructure layer questions, and I think those are table stakes. You really need those to be security and reliability to be there. But beyond that, there's a whole world of questions, I would say. And I guess I'll touch on just a couple. There are a lot of bells and whistles in a lot of products, and many of them are very valuable. But the thing to really think about, I think, is the two dimensions I'd say is one is, speaking of scalability, is your platform going to scale from a performance perspective as the amount of data gets 10 gigabytes to 2 terabytes? Are you going to be able to search as fast? Are you going to be able to review as fast? Are you going to be sitting there, twiddling your thumbs while the platform churns through a massive amount of data? And that's a problem that I think we address head on. We have an awesome infrastructure that deals with this stuff where whether it's, again, 10 gigabytes or 2 terabytes, the search is virtually instantaneous. The review speeds are really, really fast. But there are definitely platforms out there where you're waiting 8 or 10 seconds to run a search. For us, it's about a third of a second. And as you get larger and the data gets larger, it gets more and more frustrating in certain platforms. So you want to make sure that the platform you're using is going to be responsive no matter how much data you get. And the second thing is it easy to use in a really robust way? Meaning, is it the kind of platform where, at the very least, as your users come and go, they can jump in, get working very quickly and efficiently? If you have a partner who logs in once every couple weeks instead of every day, are they going to be able to figure out what they need to do next and get working? Or is there going to be a lot of anxiety and stress around learning a complex product, taking classes, getting certification, things like that? The use case we see for our users is some of them are in there every day, and we are, they're experts, and we have keyboard shortcuts and everything for them. But other ones are there logging in infrequently, and we want to make sure that the product is just accessible to them as it is for everyone else, because they're often the ones making big decisions about how to use the data and what to do with it, the evidence they're finding. And the second aspect of ease of use is the sophisticated tools that your platform has, not just the ability to review, but to make complex searches, to use artificial intelligence to find your documents, to do sophisticated reviewer quality assurance to make sure they're doing a good job. Are those tools not just available, do they exist, but are they easy to use? Is it possible for you to get in there as a layperson? As a lawyer, you're a smart person, but you're not technically savvy. Can you get in there and make sense of it? We find that you can make all the tools in the world, but if they're hard to use, people just won't use them. And so that's kind of a tragedy if you put a lot of effort into technology and no one uses it. So as a consumer, you should say, okay, well, not only does this feature exist, but let me look at it. Let me see if I can, put this to use myself without having to take, a week-long course or whatever it might be.
Can you talk about what you do to make sure that your software is usable? I know that as a kind of, field of study, UX is growing. People are hiring masters with psychology degrees and, all this complicated UX testing and tweaking and eye tracking studies. So I'd be interested in your process for improving your UX.
Yeah, I would say that, first of all, the advent of UX is awesome, and I think even in the last 5 years, just on the web, really, it's been a remarkable improvement in quality. People care about this stuff, right? Ever since Apple released that iPhone, and ever since then, Microsoft released their Metro UI, which is a really big step forward in terms of UI. People are doing really interesting things, so that is great. The fact that people care about this is great. I will say that for us, the way we think about it is, we're in an enterprise software space. We're not making consumer products. We're making enterprise products. And for whatever reason, the user experience for enterprise products is a major step down from consumer products, right? Yeah, I know, exactly. It's mind-blowing. And our mentality is simply that shouldn't be the case. You shouldn't expect your software to be slow and buggy and hard to use. You're spending, thousands of dollars a month for this thing. It should work as well as your phone, right, or your tablet or whatever it might be. So our mentality really is just raising those expectations from our users of saying, what if this were a consumer product, how would it behave, right? Things that we would take for granted in a consumer experience, or you don't take for granted in enterprise, right? So, for instance, our platform is available on every web browser, whether you're on a PC or a Mac or on a tablet, whatever, you can get to it. To me, I'm thinking, okay, well, duh, right? Of course we have to do that. But it turns out in this space, that's not a given. There are platforms that only work on a particular version of a web browser, So just raising the expectations is a big step. And our mantra internally is as fast as Google, as easy to use as an iPad. Those are the expectations we have. There's no reason why you can't make this software perform as well as those very popular experiences, right? And so we do a whole lot of user testing. We talk to our users. We track everything they do on the site. We know what areas they're having trouble with, what features they're using, what features they're not using. We have a full-time designer, of course, who's designing mock-ups. We're analyzing, testing the usability of that. I mean, it's a rigorous process. It's the kind of process that I would say that many software startups do. For whatever reason, though, you don't just see as much of that in these niche enterprise areas, and of course, I'd love to see more of that.
Absolutely. So
I think your mic is muted. Okay.
Am I back? Okay. So are you seeing an increase in startups and smaller companies getting into eDiscovery?
Well, I wouldn't. I don't know. I would say there are definitely several, which is great. But as a newcomer to this space, I'm not a lawyer. I'm one of those startups, so I couldn't tell you what it was like 10 years ago. I would say it's a rich space, and there's a lot of people working on interesting solutions. So I think that's an awesome place to be. And it's also a testament to the fact that I think that people really are looking for something better. The fact that a lot of people are interested in doing this in a better way.
Awesome. So a while ago, I interviewed Ken Grady, who kind of is trying to lead a revolution to apply the principles of lean methodology to the practice of law. Have you followed that movement at all, and do you kind of subscribe to lean methodology in your software development or sales or any of those processes?
I only tangentially have heard of it. I would say that we are a lean company. I mean, I don't know if we follow the methodology specifically, but we try to make the most of what we have, and that involves, I would say, some pretty unusual practices as far as software development goes. I actually, my PhD was in programming systems and computer science. So I actually studied a lot of software development. I taught the software engineering class at Cal. And so I've actually seen, as far as software development goes, a lot of different strategies, and I've analyzed a lot of different strategies, and tried to learn a lot from what works and what doesn't work in kind of a standard development infrastructure. And I think without boring you to tears about our development process, we have learned a lot, and I think what we've done is given our developers a different way of looking at things, where they have a lot more autonomy and a lot more freedom to design new features themselves, and that ends up being very, very powerful. We don't have PMs that manage these processes. We have the business team working directly with the developers, and that ends up being awesome. The developers are very invested in the business aspect. They know how the clients are going to use the software. And also, the features that come out aren't really neutered because the developer who's writing the feature also has a ton of say in how it's going to work. And so they know how best to get the most out of the technology. So, in that regard, there's very little overhead in our development process. And I think that's something that's really great. And as a small team, you effectively have to be lean as much as possible, right? We understanding, minimizing the waste we have is essential. And I think being a small company, that's just bread and butter, right? You have to triage every decision you make and make the best of it.
Absolutely. So how did you go from computer science to law? How did you get involved in law, and why?
That's a great question. I was a technical expert for a law firm in the mid-2000s. I was helping them. They had a number of lawsuits dealing with internet stuff, so I was basically explaining to them how the internet worked in a technical way, because the outcomes of these lawsuits actually depended on certain processes of how data was being communicated in the web. But in addition, I got to see kind of firsthand lawyers dealing with the massive amounts of evidence data they were dealing with. I was in depositions. I was certainly dealing with just documents and documents and documents, right? And even then, it was clear that there was a lot of frustration and anxiety, as I mentioned, over the software. The vendors at the time were charging a lot. The products were generally not particularly well engineered. It's the kind of thing where there is just this is again in the mid-2000s, and I think, as you said, things are changing now, which is awesome. But in any niche area, there's just not going to be as much technical interest as in a mainstream area, right? If you're, I said this before a number of times, if you're a technical entrepreneur, then you want to found a new startup, you're going to say, okay, I'm going to make the next Google or the next Facebook. You don't say, I'm going to make the next eDiscovery company, right? You don't even know that exists. So I was lucky to hear about it. I was lucky to find out that this area exists. It's a very rich area with very interesting problems, which is really exciting to me. They're challenges, they're technical challenges that are significant. So that was, at a nerd level, great, and also just a great industry to get into. People looking for a better solution. Yeah, so that's kind of how, when I saw that, I said, okay, this is something I want to do, and I ended up doing it.
What are some exciting changes that you see coming up in how technology is going to impact law. I mean, we've seen the move from paper documents to electronic documents, and you were seeing machine learning impact eDiscovery, but then there's a huge problem with access to justice. We're seeing the move toward having robots and non-lawyers do law work like document review. So tell me what interests you in all that movement.
That's a really big question. There's no doubt that technology is going to have a huge impact on law the same way it has everywhere. Legal and medical, you see they're a little bit slower to move than the mainstream consumer areas, but it's coming, right? A couple things there, right? So computers absolutely, have been for years now and continue to increase efficiency dramatically, right? Imagine just writing up briefs on legal pads, right, as opposed to editing them on your computer. So that's the kind of thing where, as far as access to law goes, I see those kinds of improvements occurring organically over the next several years, and that's going to be great. You're going to be able, there are already startups that provide legal services online where you can connect to a lawyer just for 15 minutes. You can get legal documents for $20 instead of 200, and that's fantastic. And I think that's kind of what the power of bringing kind of some of that computer technology into play. As far as discovery goes, it is going to be essential. There's these two combating aspects of discovery right now. One, the advent and an increase in sophistication of artificial intelligence algorithms, and two, the increase in data that you're seeing just through litigation, right? And so they're kind of this arms race of, okay, well, we have more data, we're going to need more AI. I will say that the state of the art in AI now is good. It's going to help you do review. It's going to help humans do review. And the way we see it playing out, at least for the next half decade or so, is that these tools are going to be augmenting human review. They're really not going to be replacing it. You're going to be able to weed out some of the most obvious bad documents, but when it comes down to the interpretation of a piece of evidence that's going to make it to court, there's really no substitute for humans now. Artificial intelligence is simply not good enough. And that's the way it's probably going to be for the foreseeable future. Really deep understanding of the context, even just language understanding, but the context surrounding and the implications of a single email, for instance, we're not that close. So we want to use artificial intelligence to help you with review. We're going to point you to the documents we think are most interesting. The computer thinks are probably the most interesting. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's going to be a human determination that's going to decide whether something's interesting or not. So it's kind of going to go hand in hand. An analogy, a great analogy is that actually Anastasia brought up with me is that, imagine a taxi driver in New York City. They understand the city very well, and what we're bringing to them is a GPS, right? That's going to give them real-time traffic updates and maybe a slightly faster way to get around the city. But you're still going to need someone to drive the car. Maybe, as far as automated, self-driving cars, that's, 5 years away, who knows? And for discovery, maybe 6 years away. But they're definitely going to be helping you with the greater and greater volumes. But at the end of the day, certainly in a court, we're not going to see AI making anything more than just a broad determination of, look at this first, or this is probably not interesting in the near future.
So in a lot of industries, Microsoft and Google and Verizon and AT&T, you have an eventual consolidation into around 2, maybe 3 big players. Do you think that that's going to happen in eDiscovery? And if so, how far away do you think that is?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I couldn't tell you. It is a very fragmented space. I think a lot of companies started out historically either regionally or as consulting firms that then built out their own platforms. Of course, if there was consolidation, we'd love to be one of those 2 or 3 companies. I will say that the cloud model does allow for a more consolidated model. It's easier to ingest data. You can access from anywhere. It's not geographically bound. So that does open some of those doors. And I think if that's going to happen, it's really going to be because there are companies with better technology that are going to be able to better handle the volumes of data ingesting, finding interesting documents, managing the workflow.
But you also have the advantage of, but you have the advantage of like you said, you need somebody to be able to get up to speed on how to use it very quickly. You have a lot of people who contract out work, and so it's like an operating system, right? You need
effectively, yeah.
Yeah, you need it to be well known, and so a contractor having to learn 6 different eDiscovery platforms or document review platforms, is not as efficient as just one or two. So that's
Yeah,
what I
that's
was
true.
thinking.
That's true. On the other hand, when you have reviewers, they do have to learn a new platform, and certainly we think ours is an easier one to learn than some, but you will spend then hundreds or thousands of hours on the platform. So, the first couple days you're learning, and then after that, it's mostly for the case leads, the partners who come in infrequently that care a little more about that. So I will say that now, the thing that's deciding what we see, when we're submitting bids for cases is the platform with the better experience and the more powerful ability to review is going to win, because these cases last for 18 or 24 months, and people making decisions want to make sure they're getting something that's going to help them win their cases. And so yeah, you just have to do a better job, build a better mousetrap.
All right, story time. I'd love to hear about some examples of people who have used your software and it's made their lives easier, saved them money, changed their lives. Some success.
We do, that's I could tell you a couple stories. It's hard to tell, of course. Well, we measure users' experiences, and we ask them how much they like the product, and so there's a lot of people who write in saying this is the best product I've ever used, the best thing I've used in my 20 years of doing discovery, and those are great. But I'll tell you two examples of one more practical and one more impractical, I'll say. The practical one is, we hosted a really, really big case last year. It was over several years and ended last year. It was a price fixing case involving Apple. We were on the plaintiff side, so our firm were suing Apple for fixing the price of electronic books, of ebooks. And it was a great outcome for the firms that used us. It was a $450 million settlement in our client's favor, which is great. A very complex case, and we did some analysis of the case in terms of the cost, the amount of money they paid us versus the amount of money they paid for the competing bids at the time when they were making the decision whether to use us. And we ended up being, I think it was something like 45 to 50% cheaper than the next closest bid. And that was a huge deal. And this is in retrospect. After the case closed, we looked at the actual number of hours they used us, how much they paid us, how much they would have paid for the competing bid. So it's a dramatic, and this is in the order of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars they saved. We also looked at time savings too. We found that one of the things we emphasize, as fast as Google, as fast as Google. So just moving between, so there are many aspects to being fast, and one of them is, having your search be fast and loading the site fast. And one of the things we measured was, how long does it take to move from one document to the next? Just that little thing, right? And it turned, we spent a lot of time, believe it or not, optimizing that, so it's just a fraction of a second. And the competing solution at the time they were looking at took something like 2 or 3 seconds to load the next document. That doesn't sound like a lot, but when you add that up over all the documents people loaded over the course of the case, it saved them something like 600 hours, 600 billable lawyer hours, and that's just for this one tiny thing of just moving from one document to the next. So that was something, just looking at the numbers there, you can, these things make a difference, right? And they can save you thousands or tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, the second story I'll tell you is just really something that just popped in my head was, we had a client, who was using our software. They'd use other software, and they moved over to us. And they started up a case with us, and it was kind of this eye-opening experience for them of, this is what this kind of product could be like. And I remember they sent us a letter, and the letter included a check for $250. It was a small firm, and they'd already paid us everything they owed us. And they said, here's $250. Like, we were, we had such a great experience. Just take this token of our appreciation. And it was kind of amazing to me. I just never ever thought that a business would just send us extra money. They got the service, they paid for it, we were happy with that, and they took the time to write us this letter. And that actually, obviously I still have that letter, and it's great. It was the kind of thing that keeps us going, is moving clients like that to take the time to forget the money, but write us a letter that says, this is so great, we love using your product. And so that was definitely, something that I definitely won't forget. Hopefully we get more. I'm not counting on it, but if we get more of those, that'll make me happy.
That's adorable. I love that. Okay, great. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is how you find the people that you need to target, and when. So, yeah, like, do you advertise, or, what do they read? How do you solve their problems beyond just providing your product?
Yeah. Okay, that's another pretty big question. A couple things. So as far as getting our name out there, we are a small startup, so we do a lot of startup-y things. We have a Twitter feed. You can follow us. We have a blog. We write about working at the company, also about legal technology. We attend these trade shows, these conferences. So Legal Tech East Coast and West Coast and ILTA are some of the big ones where we're at the one in New York in February. This coming Monday and Tuesday is Legal Tech West Coast in San Francisco. We're going to be there with a booth, and we do like 100+ demos there. A lot of people see our product that way. And so we get the word out that way, and also just word of mouth. People who like our product talk about it, and other people hear about it. And now we've gotten to the point now when we do a demo for a new client, about half the time they say, "Oh, I've heard about you guys already," and that's great for a company as small as ours. That's something we really want to hear, and they're excited to hear about us. So those are some of the traditional ways we do get the word out. We also can do email-based sales campaigns, things like that. But we think the best recommendation is the warm one, where someone says, "Okay, this is a great product. You should check it out." And so that works really well. You asked one more thing at the very end, which I forgot what it was now.
Oh,
remember.
So we do content marketing, and the idea is we provide value to the people who need what we have to offer all the time. So, do you do that, whether it's content or?
Sure, yeah, that's a great question. So that was the question, and I'm glad you re-asked it because it's super important. So yeah, so we actually provide, even on our blog, we actually tackle things like some of the more arcane technical terms in legal discovery, explaining how things like that work. And also just in our platform itself, we build out tools that are not purely related to discovery, but are really essential for lawyers' workflow. We help them with, after you've found your evidence, let's say, you found the important documents, what do? You can't just take them to court. You have to actually construct a narrative, right? And that's what lawyers do. You have to tell a story, and we actually build out tools that'll help them do that. So after they've discovered the documents, making their lives easier as far as the process of litigation goes, we're really into that, and those are some of the best tools we've released, and some of the things that get the best response are what happens after discovery. So we really try to look at holistically, what are the pain points you experience, not just in discovery, but in your daily workflow, and try to address those. And I think that's done well for us.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. Is there anything else that you want our readers to know about you, Everlaw, the future of eDiscovery?
I think we covered a whole lot. I think I'm excited about the direction we're heading in. I think some of the platform, the technology we've released to date has been pretty neat, and we have a lot more stuff coming. So, getting more emails like that one I mentioned, or more letters. Sorry, that was actually a physical letter. Getting more responses where people say this is something that's changing my life because I spend 8 hours a day reviewing. We would love to see more of that. So I think we're really excited to bring that to more people.
Absolutely. And what should people do to keep up with Everlaw?
You can go to our website, check out our blog.everlaw.com, or follow us on Twitter. Our handle is Everlaw. We post a lot of awesome stuff, interesting links that are not just, speaking of, by the way, of helping people out, not just, features and stuff about Everlaw, but interesting aspects of litigation and the legal community as a whole. So you can follow just what's going on there.
Okay, awesome. Thank you again so much for your time, AJ. It was so wonderful to meet you.